plane off the pile is a Winchester 3041 transitional plane. Let's take a look at it. Back in the day, the transitional planes were very popular. We know that today because there's still a lot of them out there. This old Winchester 3041 was made by Sargent, and it's identical to the Sargent number 3411. It's also the same as the Stanley number 35. The wooden base is 8 3/4 inches long and the iron is 2 inches wide. The plane has a cast iron top casting and a beech bottom. The tote and knob are also made out of beech. I don't have a price guide for Winchester, but I do know that the Sargent is book priced at $50 to $100. A Stanley though is book priced at $30 to $60. Winchesters are much harder to find than the Sargent, so I would say that they are at the very least the high end of the Sargent value range. It's time to break this old beauty down. And the breakdown was uneventful with only one exception, and that's the depth adjustment knob on the Frog. Normally you can take the depth adjustment knob off, but I've encountered this several times on Sargent planes. This one won't come off. When you've backed the knob out as far as it'll go, that Y adjustment lever right there, it hits the casting so it won't move anymore, and that means that the knob can't screw all the way off the back because it's trapped. You could knock the pin out, but the problem with that is this pin is peened over. The Stanley ones don't get peened over. You have to grind that off and put in a new pin, and it is definitely not worth that effort. And if there's any doubt about who made this plane for Winchester, the proof is right there. That number that you see, 3409, that's a Sargent number. Sargent made a 3409. It was also a 9-inch transitional plane, but it was the one without a handle. And with all the small parts now safely secured, I'm going to use some Simple Green and a toothbrush to clean up the Japan parts. A little bit of hot water in my deep sink is going to make a world of difference. The Frog, the bottom casting, and the lever cap cleaned up just fine. There is quite a bit of Japanning loss, but I wouldn't put it at less than 80% total Japanning remaining. The lacquer on the front knob's got a lot of checking in it, cracks. The tote, I'm not sure if there's any lacquer left on it or not. It's really hard to tell. The wooden bottom, what lacquer's left on it, it's pretty loose. It looks like it'll just rust right off. So I'm kind of torn as what to do. Should I put on new lacquer? Should I do Japanning touch-up? Or should I leave this old girl original? I think I'm leaning towards original. With that in mind, I'm going to use some 4/0 steel wool to clean up the Japan parts. What I'm going to do here is concentrate on the bare metal parts where there's surface rust, and just let the steel wool do the work and clean off what little bit of surface rust that there is. Sargent liked to take the steel adjustment knobs and brass plate them, so the brass will come off real easy. In addition to the steel wool, I like to use a well-worn sanding sponge, even up the patina on some of the parts. This machine surface is perfect for that, and even this lateral adjustment lever. So I've given these parts a good cleaning, got the steel wool on the bare metal, removed most of the surface rust. What I do want to point out is it's not very often we get to see close to what the original Japanning looked like. Look at the shine on that stuff. And now I'm going to use a similar fairly gentle cleaning approach on the wood. For that, I'm going to start with a worn sanding sponge. It's a fine sanding sponge, so a clean piece of 4/0 steel wool and a worn sanding stick. I'm going to use the sanding stick in the throat to get the flat part that the iron rests on. I'm going to hit it on the sides. This is very gentle, just cleaning it up. I can also use it in this notch right here. The sanding sponge, just gently going to clean up all the flat surfaces that I can get the sponge on. Also going to use the sanding sponge on the knob and the tote. I'm not really sanding anything more than the dirt that's on the surface, trying to even up the patina. I don't want to remove any of the old finish that's on there. The light sanding with a sponge is immediately followed up with the steel wool. And with the bottom, tote, and knob cleaned, it's time to give them a generous coat of Howard's Feed and Wax. I'm going to coat everything, and I'm going to let it soak while I finish cleaning up the rest of these plain parts. I like to use these big wooden Q-tips to get into the places where my fat fingers won't get. And while the oil soaks in, I'm going to move on to the iron and the iron cap. I'm going to use my homemade scraper, sanding sponge, and steel wool to clean them up. So my scraper with a fresh burr is going to do the initial rust removal. And next is the worn sanding sponge and steel wool. And now I have an iron and a cap iron that have been cleaned but are still going to show some of the original patina. And with all the big metal pieces done, it's just about time to break out the dirty oil rag. But first, there's going to have to be a second coat on the wood parts, because look at that. It soaked up the oil. And with another good coat complete, it is time to break out the dirty oil rag. And that rag is also saturated with some Howard's Feed and Wax. The dirty oil gets applied to all the metal parts. And at this point, the dirty oil's been on for about 3 or 4 hours. I put 4 coats of oil on the wood, and now it's time to move on to the small parts where I use a dental pick and some sandpaper folded and thick enough to fit tight in the slots. The dental pick gets the bulk of the rust and grime out, and then you hit the slots with the sandpaper. It does a great job. Attention to detail like this pays off. You'll find some of the screw slots are concave, so you got to kind of put the corner point of your sandpaper, angle it down, and get it in that recess. And with the 7th screw slot done, it's over to the wire wheel to finish up the small parts. And just like that, all the small parts are done, and they're ready for a coat of rim oil. And this restoration is moving along just fine. That 4th coat of oil is soaked in for a little while. The last thing I'm going to do with that is take some 4/0 steel wool, and I'm going to kind of rub it real good. While the oil's still wet, this is the final touch. I think it makes a beautiful finish when it's done. And now all that's left to do is wipe off all the oil and give everything a coat of wax. So I'm moving right along on this little Winchester thinking, man, this is going quick. I'm putting the last of the wax on, and guess what? I didn't sharpen the iron. But that's okay though, because it's not quite time for supper yet. So I've got that iron locked in my General number 810 chisel and plain iron sharpener at a 25-degree angle, and I'm ready to put the bevel on it. The 25-degree bevel is finished. Now I move over here where I use 320, 1000, 3000, 5000, and 7000 grit paper. And now I'm back on schedule. That's the way the old iron's supposed to look. So I'm wiping the wax off all these parts when my 25 years of Marine Corps experience paid off. My finely honed skills of observation kicked in. On the underside of the top casting, there's the number 3411. So that's what I said when this thing started out, that this was the same as a Sergeant number 3411, and there's the proof. So now there's nothing left to do but put this old plane back together and take her for a test drive. And this old girl is back together and ready for the top shelf. now it's time for the test drive. The piece of wood that I'm using for this test drive is slightly wider than what the plain iron is. This is about 2 3/16 of an inch wide. Let's see what she'll do. Woohoo! That's some serious shavings right there. This old girl looked good enough to sit on the top shelf. She performs good enough to sit on the top shelf. She passes the test. Now that's an old girl that you'd be proud to take home to mother. She performs just as good as she looks. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't entered my contest for making a wig, check out the video that tells you how to do it. You can win a Winchester #3 size plane. So it's off to the pile to see what's next, but until then, it's time for supper. Bye.